Funerals are notorious for their polite fictions. We stand in damp grass, clad in dark fabrics, and listen to well-meaning relatives sand down the sharp, complicated edges of a human life, until only a smooth, unrecognizable saint remains. They talk of boundless grace, of endless patience, of a gentle spirit that never harbored a single dark thought. But those who truly know the departed understand that the most fascinating parts of a person are the shadows they hide behind their polished porcelain veneers. True character isn't forged in the polite smiles exchanged over Sunday brunch. It is revealed in the final, desperate moments when the hourglass runs dry and there is nothing left to lose. The hospice room smelled of industrial lemon cleaner, stale rubbing alcohol, and the distinct, cloying sweetness of decaying flowers. Clara sat in a vinyl chair that sighed every time she shifted her weight, watching her oldest friend shrink into the sterile white sheets. Evelyn had once been a woman of formidable elegance, the kind who wore cashmere even in mid-July and never left the house without a perfect application of rose-tinted lipstick. Now stage 4 breast cancer had reduced her to a translucent shell. Her collarbones jutted sharply against her skin, and the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of the oxygen concentrator was the loudest sound in the room. For 30 years, Clara had been the tempest to Evelyn's calm harbor. Where Clara was loud, fiercely protective, and prone to swearing at bad drivers, Evelyn was the picture of demure restraint. She had never raised her voice, never gossiped maliciously, and certainly never uttered a single profane word. Evelyn's entire existence was a masterclass in quiet dignity, which made her sudden request all the more jarring. The afternoon sun was bleeding through the plastic blinds, casting long, bruised shadows across the linoleum floor when Evelyn's eyes fluttered open. She reached out, her fingers resembling dry autumn twigs, and gripped Clara's wrist with surprising, desperate strength. "I want to go to the pictures," Evelyn whispered, her voice a fragile rasp like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Clara blinked, leaning closer. "The pictures? Evie, sweetie, you can barely sit up. The nurse said your blood pressure is—" "I don't care what the nurse said," Evelyn interrupted, her tone devoid of its usual melodic softness. "Get my coat, the navy pea coat, and my chair. We are going out." Clara stared at her friend, searching the sunken, bruised hollows of her eyes for signs of delirium. The cancer had spread to her bones, her liver, perhaps even her brain. "Evie, I have to unhook the morphine drip. I have to pack the portable oxygen. It's 30 degrees outside." "Then you had best start packing," Evelyn replied, releasing Clara's wrist and staring fixedly at the ceiling. The conversation was over. It took 45 minutes of grueling, terrified labor. Clara's back ached as she wrestled with the heavy, folding wheelchair, pinching her fingers in the metal cross braces. Transferring Evelyn from the bed to the chair felt like handling spun glass. Clara wrapped her friend in 3 thick blankets, securing the portable oxygen tank to the back of the chair with a bungee cord, her hands trembling the entire time. Every shallow breath Evelyn took sounded like a struggle, a tiny victory against the suffocating weight of her own failing body. The journey to Clara's battered station wagon was an agonizing parade through the sterile corridors of the care facility. Nurses cast disapproving, pitying glances their way, but Clara ignored them, focused entirely on the fragile cargo she was pushing. Outside, the freezing wind bit into Clara's cheeks, but Evelyn sat perfectly rigid, her jaw set, completely impervious to the chill. Clara hoisted her friend into the passenger seat, strapping her in alongside the tangled plastic tubing of the oxygen cannula. The engine turned over with a protesting whine, the heater blasting cold air before slowly warming to a dusty, metallic heat. "The multiplex on Route 9, Clara asked, throwing the car into drive. "They're playing that period piece you read the book for." "No," Evelyn said, staring straight out the windshield. "Turn left onto Elm." Clara frowned. "Elm. The theater is the other way." "Left on Elm, Clara." There was a chilling authority in Evelyn's voice, a commanding frequency Clara had never heard in 3 decades of friendship. Clara swallowed her questions, flicked the blinker, and turned the heavy wheel. They drove in silence, the tires humming over cracked asphalt. Clara watched her friend from the corner of her eye. Evelyn was applying a fresh coat of that signature rose lipstick, her frail hand shaking violently, yet she managed to trace the curve of her lips with muscle memory. She looked less like a dying woman seeking comfort and more like a soldier preparing for a final catastrophic deployment. "Take the highway ramp toward Oak Ridge," Evelyn instructed, snapping her compact mirror shut with a sharp click. Oak Ridge was a sprawling, affluent suburb 20 miles away from the theater. It was a neighborhood of manicured lawns, wrought iron gates, and towering oak trees that shielded massive brick colonials from the prying eyes of the main road. "Evie, what are we doing?" Clara's grip tightened on the steering wheel, the worn leather squeaking beneath her palms. "You're exhausted, your breathing is shallow, if you need to see a doctor." "Take the second exit." Clara obeyed, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. They navigated the winding, picturesque streets, the afternoon light fading into a bruised, purple twilight. Evelyn called out turns with the precision of a navigator, her gaze fixed entirely on the passing driveways. "Here," Evelyn finally said, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at a sprawling slate-blue house at the end of a cul-de-sac. "Stop the car." Clara threw the wagon into park, the engine idling loudly in the quiet, wealthy street. The house was immaculate. Perfectly trimmed boxwoods lined a cobblestone path leading to a heavy oak front door. A silver luxury sedan sat gleaming in the driveway. "Who lives here?" Clara asked, her voice hushed. "Get the chair," Evelyn commanded, unbuckling her seatbelt with agonizing slowness. The freezing air hit them again as Clara unloaded the equipment. She practically carried Evelyn into the wheelchair, terrified that her friend's brittle bones would shatter under the strain. Evelyn's breathing was growing increasingly labored, a wet, rattling sound that made Clara's throat tighten with panic. "We shouldn't be here," Clara pleaded, pushing the chair up the steep, uneven cobblestone driveway. The rubber tires squeaked against the stone. "Please, Evie, let me take you back to the warm bed." Evelyn said nothing. She simply pointed a rigid finger at the front door. Clara navigated the chair onto the wide, wraparound porch. The air smelled of expensive pine mulch and impending snow. Evelyn reached up, bypassing the illuminated doorbell, and grasped the heavy brass knocker. She brought it down 3 times. The sound echoed like gunshots in the quiet neighborhood. Footsteps approached from inside. The deadbolt slid back with a heavy metallic thud and the door swung open. Standing in the foyer was a woman in her late 30s. She wore a plush ivory cashmere sweater and dark designer jeans. Her dark hair was perfectly blown out, and she held a ceramic mug of steaming coffee. She had the kind of effortless, radiant beauty that money and youth afforded. She looked at Clara with mild confusion, then lowered her gaze to the wheelchair. The color drained from the woman's face so rapidly it was as if a valve had been opened in her neck. Her eyes went wide, reflecting the porch light, and the ceramic mug in her hand trembled. "Hello, Valerie," Evelyn said. Her voice was no longer a fragile rasp. It was a weapon. It cut through the freezing air with the precision of a surgical scalpel. Valerie's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She took a half-step backward, her knuckles turning white around her coffee mug. Clara stood frozen behind the wheelchair, gripping the rubber handles so tightly her own hands ached. She looked from the terrified woman to her dying friend, the missing pieces of a grotesque puzzle rapidly assembling in her mind. Arthur, Evelyn's husband, the frequent business trips to the city, the late nights. The sudden influx of expensive jewelry Arthur had gifted Evelyn over the past 2 years, tokens of a guilty conscience. "I know," Evelyn said, the 2 syllables dripping with absolute glacial disdain. She didn't yell, she didn't cry. She sat perfectly upright, an immovable queen upon a canvas and metal throne. "I know you have been sleeping with my husband." Valerie gasped a pathetic strangled noise. "Evelyn, Please let me explain." "You will not speak," Evelyn commanded, shutting the woman down with a look of such intense ferocity that Clara physically flinched. Evelyn leaned forward, the oxygen tubing stretching taut across her hollow cheeks. The dying light caught the sharp angles of her face, illuminating a lifetime of suppressed rage, of swallowed pride, of silent suffering. She had protected her husband's reputation. She had smiled through the country club dinners. She had played the perfect, demure wife while a rot far worse than her cancer ate away at her marriage. "I hope you feel good about yourself," Evelyn continued, her voice dropping to a terrifying, intimate whisper. "I hope you feel an immense sense of pride, spreading your legs for him while I lay in a hospital bed, losing my hair, losing my dignity, and losing my life." Valerie was openly weeping now, fat tears rolling down her pristine, flushed cheeks. She looked down at the expensive hardwood floor, unable to meet the burning intensity of Evelyn's gaze. "Look at me," Evelyn hissed. Valerie's head snapped up, terrified. Evelyn offered a smile that contained absolutely no warmth. It was a baring of teeth. "You think you have won, you think you will take my place when I am in the ground, but you will never wash the stench of what you are off your skin." Evelyn paused, drawing in a slow, rattling breath of pure oxygen. She locked eyes with her husband's mistress, ensuring her final words would brand themselves permanently onto the woman's soul. "I will be back to haunt you, you wretched bitch." The curse word hung in the freezing air, heavy and absolute. In 30 years, Clara had never heard Evelyn use language stronger than darn. Hearing that word, delivered with such venomous, articulate perfection from a woman hours away from death, was the most awe-inspiring thing Clara had ever witnessed. "Clara," Evelyn said, never breaking eye contact with the sobbing woman in the doorway, "we are leaving." Clara jolted into action, pulling the chair backward. She didn't look at Valerie. She simply pivoted the wheels and navigated back down the cobblestone driveway. Behind them, the heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing the mistress inside her beautiful, poisoned house. The drive back to the hospice was entirely silent. The darkness of night had fully settled, the only light inside the car coming from the faint green glow of the dashboard. Clara's mind was a hurricane. She wanted to scream, to turn the car around and burn Arthur's belongings on the front lawn, to weep for the agony her friend had carried entirely alone. But as she glanced over at the passenger seat, she saw that Evelyn's eyes were closed. The rigid tension that had possessed her body for the last 2 hours had evaporated. She looked smaller now, sinking deep into the heavy navy peacoat. The fire in her eyes had burned out, but her lips, still perfectly traced in rows, were curved into a faint, genuine smile of profound peace. She had reclaimed her narrative. She had refused to exit the stage as the naive, tragic victim. She had ensured that the ghosts she left behind would not be her own. 3 days later, Evelyn passed away in her sleep. At the funeral, Arthur stood at the front of the church, dabbing his dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, playing the role of the devastated widower to perfection. People whispered about Evelyn's gentle soul, her quiet grace, her absolute purity. Clara sat in the back pew, listening to the polite fictions. She watched Arthur accept condolences from oblivious neighbors. But she also noticed the way he continually checked his phone, the subtle tension in his jaw, the dark circles under his eyes. Valerie wasn't at the funeral, and judging by the haunted, hollow look in Arthur's eyes, Clara knew with absolute certainty that the mistress had already packed her bags. Evelyn's ghost had already arrived. We spend so much of our lives terrified of making a scene. We bite our tongues, we swallow our anger, and we prioritize the comfort of others over the truth of our own pain. We are taught that grace means suffering in silence, that dignity requires us to be passive victims to the betrayals of those we trust. But true dignity isn't found in a polite silence. It is found in the courage to look your betrayers in the eye and name their sins out loud. You do not owe your silence to those who have wronged you. You do not owe comfort to the people who broke your heart. Before the curtain falls on your story, make sure you are the one holding the pen. Reclaim your voice, speak your truth, and never let anyone mistake your kindness for weakness. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of taking back your narrative, leave a like on this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message today, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories exploring the deep, complicated, and triumphant depths of the human experience. Until next time, stay strong and never be afraid to leave a haunting of your own.